in his pardon document, am I correct in this? Tartaglione is basically saying that the government did want him dead. After all, the required 30-minute checks were not carried out. We've seen how damaging it's been to Prince Andrew. We've had Prince William making something pretty close to an apology this morning. I mean, it's not actually an apology.
I mean, we know he's a total narcissist who likes to control the narrative. Narcissists don't tend to take their own life.
Hello, it's Tom Sykes, the Royalist here, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by Daily Beast reporter Tom Latchem, who has got an amazing investigation into new suggestions that perhaps foul play was involved in the death of Jeffrey Epstein in his New York jail cell on the 10th of August 2019. Tom, tell us a bit about this. I've read your piece in the Daily Beast with interest. As far as I could tell, what you're basically saying is that Epstein was incarcerated with a violent and dangerous killer with a known hatred of paedophiles. Previously, it was alleged that this guy, Nicholas Tartaglione, had a pop at Epstein. And now in his pardon document, am I correct in this? Tartaglione is basically saying that the government did want him dead after all. So new evidence for the murder of Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah. So I mean, we should probably caveat this. Hello, by the way, Tom. Nice to be on. Thanks for inviting me. I should probably caveat all of this by saying that this is the claim of one man, and you are right. He is a quadruple killer, right? So he's not, perhaps you might think, the most reliable of witnesses, but in his pardon letter, which is 21 pages, we obtained it for the Daily Beast, he makes some quite interesting claims, some of them very helpful to Donald Trump. He goes after Maureen Comey. Of course, Maureen Comey is the son of James Comey, who he's tried to prosecute over various things recently. He's a nemesis of his. So, he talks about that. But the one thing that is interesting, and that had previously been reported, actually, but the one thing that hadn't been reported, which it jumped out as the most interesting line, particularly now, given all that's going on, is that he said that he believed that the government, which of course in 2019 was led by Donald Trump, had wanted Jeffrey Epstein dead. He said it was no coincidence that he was put in a cell with himself, Nicholas Tartaglione. And not only that, Nicholas Tartaglione says he was moved into the jail and into the cell deliberately. Now, Nicholas Tartaglione has repeatedly said he didn't touch Jeffrey Epstein or do anything to Jeffrey Epstein. But 3 weeks before Epstein died, he made an allegation against Tartaglione that Tartaglione had tried to throttle him, and he did have injuries around his neck. Then a little while later, hours later, he then said, Epstein then said, I've actually forgotten what happened. So he rode back on it. So why would he say that if it weren't true and then rode back on it? It doesn't really make a great deal of sense. Tartaglione says that, I didn't do anything to him. I never touched him. In fact, I found him with a piece of string around his neck on that occasion. But it is interesting that they were paired together. And we aren't the only ones that think this. Joe Rogan said last Tuesday, why would you put a man, Jeffrey Epstein, one of the, at the time, the most high-profile prisoners in the country, if not the world, who had alleged links to the secret services in a number of countries, who had in the files, we've seen the files are coming out, there are repeatedly names of Donald Trump, but others in his orbit, in high society, in politics, etc., who appears to have a lot of knowledge on a lot of these people. Why would you put that man in a cell with anybody, frankly, let alone with a quadruple killer who has himself in the past said he hates child sex abusers? So, and as I say, Tartaglione in his letter says it was no coincidence I was put in there. He doesn't elaborate on that, but even that in and of itself is pretty interesting. And I mean, I don't see why he would put that in the letter if he's trying to appeal to Donald Trump. I find it weird. So yeah, you can say he's an unreliable witness, and he talks about Comey and all the things that are likely to appeal to Trump in this pardon letter to get the pardon. It's not clear to me why he would say that But he says he was also put at risk, and he was allowed to be beaten up several times, put in general wing. Tartaglione, he was a former cop as well, so he's going to be unpopular. And he says that he was just allowed to be on general wing and was attacked twice after Jeffrey Epstein was killed. And he's like, again, he's sort of suggesting that's sort of handy, isn't it? As though and he says they wanted me dead as well.
So just to be clear, Jeffrey Epstein was found unresponsive on the morning of August the 10th. He had been in the cell on his own for 2 nights. I think that was the second night that he was on his own. Tartaglione had been moved out of the cell. So Tartaglione was not there when Epstein died. Well, was not his roommate, cellmate, sorry, is probably a better way of putting that, on the night that he died. He had no cellmate. But there's so many other extraordinary features about this death. I mean, just for example, the required 30-minute checks were not carried out by the jailhouse cops, and they later falsified logs and admitted they'd fallen asleep, didn't they?
Yes, they had. There's what the report into Jeffrey Epstein's death said was that there was a catalogue of mistakes, and look, we do know that these things do happen in prison. The prison has since been shut down because it's such a parlous state. It was they call it the Guantanamo Bay, or effectively the sort of the American prisons version of Guantanamo Bay. It wasn't very nice. It was falling to bits. It was clearly not fit for purpose. And whatever happened on that night, what is a fact is that Jeffrey Epstein was not properly monitored and properly looked after. And again, you're like, why? And I just think that I know people who've been in prison, who've worked in prisons. I just don't feel it would happen in this way. If it did happen, you think, well, is anybody ever kept safe in a prison? If you can't keep this guy safe, and this is the guy you really want to be kept safe, then And what is interesting as well is we did a little straw poll inside of our team the other day at the Daily Beast, and this is seen as part of a conspiracy theory, right? This idea that Jeffrey Epstein did not kill himself is viewed as a conspiracy theory, but all the team and a lot of the people I speak to say, and in fact the comments on the story was interesting as well. They're saying, don't tend to believe conspiracy theories, but this is one conspiracy theory I really do believe in, because there are so many mistakes around it, and you just think, what are the chances of this happening? It's all very handy, isn't it, that these mistakes all happened? I mean, Jeffrey Epstein himself had said he wasn't. I mean, we know he's a total narcissist who likes to control the narrative. Narcissists don't tend to take their own lives, and yet, he did. And also, there was a very, very decent chance he got off the previous. Get off, but he got a plea bargain on the previous child sex offence in 2008, despite a wealth of evidence. There's no reason why he felt he couldn't have done the same thing again. I don't know that this is a man that was in a situation whereby was the obvious route, was the obvious thing to happen, and so there are just loads of questions. And just last week, things have come out in the Epstein files. There was. We know already there was videos missing of the time in which he, prior to which he took his own life. But there was also logs that were contradictory between the Bureau of Prisons and the FBI. There was on the cameras, there was a flash of orange that went up in the period prior to his death, where they'd said no one had visited. You're like, well, someone did.
Just to be clear, that what the flash of orange, I mean, what that looks like is it looks like another prisoner just basically wandering around the jail.
It could be another
prisoner, going up a staircase.
They also have said that it could have been a guard taking clothes up there. But point being is, whatever it was, they said nobody went up there. And then you can see the video. Somebody went up there, whoever that might be. And so therefore the official line that nobody was in that cell with him, or was in that area with him in the hours before he died, doesn't really stand up to scrutiny.
I think, Tom, one really interesting point that you made there is this point that he wasn't totally effed at that stage. Do you know what I mean? He was he was still alive. Like, obviously now, as soon as somebody dies, right, they can't sue you for libel. So people can say whatever they want about it. So now it's like, Epstein's a paedophile, Epstein's this, Epstein's that. When he was alive, people were very cautious about what they said about him because he was extremely powerful. So don't forget that the narrative that we have now from the files coming out is and because he's dead, you can say whatever you want about him and he can't sue you, is very, very different, as you were saying there, to how he was perceived, the day before he allegedly took his own life. So, I mean, it's easy to sort of see this through the lens of what we know about him today and go, oh, he was totally stuffed. He was that. But as you say, it wasn't the case at all. I mean, he could theoretically have beaten these charges. He had enormous wealth to deploy. He had very powerful friends. He obviously had a lot of ammo, a lot of compromat. I mean, it does, as you say, it doesn't. It's not like his case was not totally hopeless. And
also there was a memo. There was a memo
when their case is totally hopeless, right?
Well, there was also a memo that came out in the latest Epstein files that I've just seen, where I think I can't remember who ran the story just this morning. The FBI said that they went over all of the Epstein files and they felt that there wasn't enough to bring a case further to him obviously abusing children, right? But again, similarly, it's like that is not on the same level as him providing children to other people. If it's a sole, if you're doing it for your sole purposes, it is less serious in terms of the law. It's not unserious, but it's less serious in the law in terms of if you were trafficking. And they said that we didn't have evidence of that. So there's no reason why he couldn't have done something similar again. And again, as I say to you, I've done a lot of work in the past reporting on narcissists. There was a journalist in particular that I worked looking at some stories in the past few years. And that person, we were getting word back that person was, and we were concerned about that. That person did not take their own life. And actually what you learn when you're looking at this stuff is that narcissists, they don't tend to take their own lives. Like, they believe that they can control the situations, and they will endeavor to control the narrative. And if they take their own life, they lose control of the narrative. They lose control of what people are saying about them. That's what they care about. Psychologically, this is what we learn and what we hear. And particularly a man of Epstein's standing. So not just any old narcissist, but an incredibly wealthy and well-connected narcissist who has controlled the narrative, not just controlled the narrative, but clearly from the files, controlled a whole number of people through finance, through connection, through power. Well, all of a sudden he's just going to abandon what he's done for the past 30 years. Seems unusual. It seems questionable.
Yeah. There was an extraordinary story I saw at the weekend saying that coming out in the files, the statement announcing Jeffrey Epstein's death had the wrong date on it and was actually dated the day before. I mean, it feels like, in all these things would always assume that it's a cock-up rather than a conspiracy. But, I mean, it is odd that the and we'll show that. Ben can probably grab that and put that up on the screen. Obviously, Jeffrey S. Berman, who will be familiar to anyone who's followed the Andrew story, who tried to get Andrew to testify and that kind of thing. I mean, just a sort of catalogue of, and then, the CCTV cameras not working and like all this kind of stuff. It just feels like incredibly, in the original meaning of that word, non-credibly slapdash the whole thing, doesn't it? At best.
If I were to say about that memo, I would say that probably is a mistake, right? But isn't it handy that these mistakes are made when the other mistakes are made, and then you can say they're all mistakes? I just think with all these things, Occam's razor is your best answer. What is the most likely thing here? And I just look at the fact he was in a cell with a dangerous person, for example, at the very, very start, who hated
quadruple murderer.
I mean, well, and also he said in a previous letter to Tartaglione to the New York Daily News, he said he himself said, I was a very curious, that's not his word, I'm paraphrasing. I was a very curious choice of, they could have chosen anybody and they chose me. And you're like, yeah, you're right. This is, how many people are there in American prisons? It could have been anybody. It could have been, and yet they put him in with someone who really, obviously very, very dangerous. He was later convicted, by the way, of the 4 killings of 4 men. So he, it was a sort of a spree. It was in a one-off incident, but he's obviously lunatic. Yeah, why would you put him in with this very, very high profile person who you would want to keep safe? Would you not? If it was very important to being for someone to, if the government viewed him as being important for him to be kept safe, you would, wouldn't you? And so therefore you wouldn't put him in with that guy. And I just think of all of the things you think Occam's razor, then all the things that have happened later with the missing, the botched investigation, the missing video, etc., etc. You're like, it all points, doesn't it, to that? And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, right? I'm a journalist. This is what we do, right? So yes, you give credence to anything. You try and knock things down, but you don't run stuff on the basis of it being just someone saying it, poke holes in it. But this is a man who himself has said it. And people are sort of saying, well, he's not a very reliable witness, is he, Tom? And you're like, well, no, I mean, he may not be. And I opened this very piece up by saying, no, he's not. But he said it. And we merely reported that. And I just think that if you look at everything in the round, the most likely thing feels to me like there was. I would not be able to rule out that there was any foul play that took place as regards Jeffrey Epstein's death, whether or not he took his own life, it was allowed to do so, or whether someone else helped him to do so, or whatever. I think the idea that he was just, I'm going to take my own life now and that's it, feels the least likely of the things. So therefore, you investigate and you look at other things. I mean, all it does is it just adds to the mystery around this moment and it adds fuel to the fire of the conspiracy theorist, doesn't it? Really?
Yeah. And I mean, but as you say, I mean, it's an unusual, as conspiracy theories go, it's an unusual one because it's backed up by so much incontrovertible evidence that this could have been the case. So, I mean, for example, there's a prison psychologist who said in his report that he was too cowardly to hurt himself. Epstein's lawyer, Reed Weingarten, said at around the time of his death, we did not see a despairing or despondent person. And then this whole thing of Epstein having alleged that Tartaglione tried to kill him and then saying that he forgot it and then put, it's just crazy, isn't it? It's just absolutely crazy. And then his own letter to the Daily News. I never touched the man. I despise anyone who hurts children, but whatever was going to happen, I was not going to be a part of it. The staff here at MCC had hundreds of inmates to choose from, yet I was their first choice. I mean, it is absolutely bonkers.
What I didn't report, there was a line in the at the very bottom of the pardon, and I didn't report this, as we decided to just leave this out. But I found it quite intriguing. Was
the pardon request? It's pardon.
Yeah, the pardon letter, the 21-word pardon letter to Donald Trump from Tartaglione. He wrote a line that said, I can't remember the verbatim, but it was effectively along the lines of, I think you should commute my sentence, and on the basis of as like a not favor, but along the lines of because as out of a duty to America or something like that. And
right.
You're like, what does that mean? I mean, because you killed 4 men. I mean, I've got to say, I don't think most Americans would be that up for releasing a quadruple killer on the basis just that you're a quadruple killer. So what does he mean? That's weird. That's a weird line, isn't it?
Yeah.
I found that a weird line. I'm like, but most people in America probably wouldn't mind Jeffrey Epstein dying, would they?
So as he says in the pardon, and this is Tartaglione's writing, it is no coincidence that prior to trial, I was transferred to the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan and deliberately placed in the same cell as Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, I truly believe that the government wanted both Epstein and me dead, because this is another important bit of it, isn't it? That having set him up, in the theory would be that having set him up to commit the crime, then to get rid of the evidence, they then put him, this police officer, in Gen Pop, which is like completely mad. You know what I mean? It's like,
if a man is killed in jail, or that after, whether he did or he didn't do anything, but if a man is therefore killed afterwards, he can't talk about anything, can he? So, I mean, at the end of the day, the government is again helped by the fact that this man is a quadruple killer. So you've got to take what he says with a pinch of salt. But I just find some of the language that he used in the letter in this appeal to Donald Trump intriguing.
Yeah, no, it really is, isn't it? I think the one thing that I slightly, for me, militates against the deliberate murder theory is that actually, because Epstein is now dead, all this material has been released in a way that it wouldn't have been released if he was still alive. And it's actually been incredibly damaging to all kinds of people. But on the flip side of that, I suppose we have to recognize that, Trump's name is very, very absent from the files. Now, obviously, there's two theories on that. Theory A is that it's been redacted all over the place. But theory B, which lots of people do say, is that Trump did not have a great deal to do with Epstein. And I wonder, if you buy into this theory that it was the global elite that assassinated Epstein, I actually think that Epstein's death was probably ultimately unhelpful for them. I mean, they couldn't have foreseen that all the files were going to be released, of course. But, we've seen how damaging it's been to Prince Andrew. We've had Prince William making something pretty close to an apology this morning. I mean, it's not actually an apology, but, ultimately, a lot of the stuff has only come out because he was dead, right?
Also, you might also argue that it's been controlled in the way it's been released. Whereas if Jeffrey Epstein was still alive, that's more difficult because you've got a man who can say whatever heck he likes. He's in front of a court, so therefore it can be reported with, in the UK you'd call it with qualified privilege, but you're allowed to report what's said in an open court. Same in America. So that's probably a lot more risky than the DOJ controlling a release. It's not me. I'm not saying they are or they aren't, but they have the ability now to control all the narrative. And let's face it, it's not that bad. Some people are going under a bus, and I would argue that Prince Andrew was one of those people. Sorry, mate, but this is going to happen for you. And actually, it takes away a lot of the attention, isn't it? Peter Mandelson, you're going under a bus too. I don't know what's not redacted. This is the problem, isn't it? It's not a complete unredacted dump, and it never will be. So again, it fuels those conspiracy theories, but it is a lot easier to control the narrative when you're in control of all the documents and the person who wrote them is dead.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, Tom, so thank you so much for joining us. Just before we go, I wanted to play a little game with you, which we're going to try and name as many people as possible have been brought down by the Epstein files.
It's not many, is it? I mean, given the number of people that are in there and the things that it says, including America's cabinet members, it's not that many. Anyway, come on then, let's play the game.
Okay, I'm going to start with Prince Andrew, obviously in my wheelhouse. Peter Mandelson. Could Keir Starmer go? Do you think Keir Starmer could go in the next few?
He could. I think we need to get out of that. People make mistakes. Politicians make mistakes. They must go. I think we were doing that for a long time under the. I mean, the psychodrama of the Tories over the last 10 years since Brexit. I don't think that's helpful for the country. I don't think Keir Starmer going right now would necessarily be useful. I don't see anyone who's going to step in. Is he doing a great job? He's doing an all right job. But anyway, he could go. I'd hope he wouldn't. I don't think it helps the country, the UK. Yeah. Come on then. Who else? I mean, has anybody else been brought down?
Daly. I mean, there's a couple of people, aren't there? But I mean, I suppose, ultimately, actually, the great irony of the whole thing is that the only person who's actually gone to jail is a woman.
Sort of classic, really. Classic of the genre. I mean, I think that the problem is that, so you talk about the people who've been taken down so far, largely they're British, right? So the UK still, fortunately, although I think this will probably change in the coming years because we always copy what happens in America. But the UK still has a system whereby there is accountability, and noise doesn't just overrule that. Whereas in America, Donald Trump, the noisiest of all of the people, just shouts and obfuscates and says, "Oh, look over there," and everybody does. And I think that actually in America, I don't think it's any coincidence that really the only people that have fallen, I mean, you just named 3 of them, they're all British.
Yeah. It's been a fascinating conversation. I'm sure this is one of those issues that we'll be talking about for years to come. Thanks very much to Tom Latchem, lead global correspondent for the Daily Beast. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. And I actually have some inside intel, Tom, and I don't know if you can say anything about it yet, that Tom is actually launching a Substack.
I'm going to do my own stories. I won't tell you the name of it yet, but I can. It's not going to be a secret. The stories are going to be in the same vein in which I do on the Daily Beast, which are generally trying to pull the pants down of the rich and powerful on behalf of those who are less rich and powerful, giving a voice to the underdog, being punchy, being, bringing a bit of British tabloid spirit. I worked on the British tabloids for 20 years, bringing a bit of that British tabloid spirit, but to an American audience. And I tell you what, trying to counter political and corporate overreach. And I've got to say, I think America and the wider world needs this more than ever. So, I mean, I know that's a bit of a grand ambition, but it's just going to be, fundamentally, it's going to be interesting human stories which sort of try to hold power to account.